The electricity between them was so thick Noah Ward could practically taste it. His straight roommate Mark Price sat barely inches away on their worn leather couch, having asked to watch something together hours ago. But the movie had ended 20 minutes past, and neither of them had moved. Mark's hand rested on the cushion between them, close enough that Noah could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, close enough that one small shift would bring their fingers together. Noah's heart hammered against his ribs as he stole another glance at Mark's profile, illuminated by the blue glow of the television screen showing credits that neither of them were reading. There was something different about tonight, something charged in the way Mark had lingered in the doorway of Noah's room earlier, something vulnerable in how he had asked if they could just hang out and watch something mindless together. "The movie's over," Noah said softly, his voice barely above a whisper in the quiet apartment. Mark turned to look at him then, and Noah felt his breath catch. Those familiar brown eyes held something Noah had never seen before, a kind of searching intensity that made his stomach flip and his mouth go dry. "I know," Mark replied, but he made no move to get up, no move to reach for the remote, no move to break whatever spell had settled over them in the darkness. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and possibilities that Noah had spent months convincing himself were nothing more than wishful thinking. But the way Mark was looking at him now, the way his gaze seemed to linger on Noah's lips before flicking back up to his eyes made all of Noah's careful rationalization crumble like sand. "Mark," Noah began, not sure what he was going to say, not sure he had the courage to say anything at all. "I've been thinking," Mark interrupted, his voice rougher than usual, "about what you said last week, about knowing when something feels right." Noah's pulse quickened. He remembered that conversation, remembered the way Mark had complained about his latest date feeling forced and empty, remembered how he had offered what he thought was safe advice about trusting your instincts and finding someone who made you feel complete. But to understand how they arrived at this moment, how two roommates who had started as nothing more than strangers sharing rent money had somehow found themselves balanced on the knife's edge of something that could change everything, we need to go back to the beginning. 3 months earlier, Noah had been scrolling through roommate listings with the desperate energy of someone whose previous living situation had imploded spectacularly. His ex-boyfriend had moved out in a blaze of accusations and slammed doors, taking half the furniture and leaving Noah with a lease he couldn't afford alone and a heart that felt like it had been put through a blender. The apartment listing had been almost too good to be true. Spacious two-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, reasonable rent, and the current tenant seemed normal enough from his brief email responses. Noah had expected to meet some generic guy looking to split bills, maybe exchange pleasantries about cleaning schedules and utility payments, and then retreat to their separate lives. He had not expected Mark Price. Mark had answered the door in a paint-splattered t-shirt and jeans that hung perfectly on his lean frame, brown hair messy in a way that looked effortless, but probably took actual effort to achieve. His smile had been warm and genuine, the kind that reached his eyes and made something flutter in Noah's chest that he had immediately tried to suppress. "You must be Noah," Mark had said, stepping aside to let him into the apartment. "Sorry about the mess. I was working on a project." The apartment had been anything but messy. It was lived in and comfortable, with warm lighting and furniture that actually matched, unlike the hodgepodge collection Noah was used to from years of post-college living. Canvases leaned against one wall of the living room, some finished paintings that showed real talent, others half-completed works in progress. "You're an artist," Noah had observed, trying not to stare at the way Mark's forearms looked as he gestured toward the paintings. "What is it?" Mark had replied with a self-deprecating laugh. "Kutamon." They had talked for over an hour that day, conversation flowing easily from apartment logistics to favorite movies to the best coffee shops in the neighborhood. Mark had been funny and thoughtful, asking questions about Noah's work in graphic design and actually listening to the answers. By the time Noah left, he had known he wanted to live there, and not just because the rent was reasonable. Moving in had been surprisingly easy. Mark had helped him carry boxes, had cleared space in the kitchen for Noah's coffee maker, had somehow made the transition feel natural instead of awkward. They had fallen into a comfortable rhythm within days, sharing morning coffee and evening conversations, respecting each other's space while gradually becoming something that felt like friends. Noah had told himself that the flutter in his chest every time Mark smiled at him was just appreciation for having a decent roommate. He had convinced himself that the way he looked forward to their casual conversations was perfectly normal. He had even managed to ignore the way his heart rate picked up when Mark would brush past him in the kitchen or when they would end up sitting close together on the couch during their occasional movie nights. It had taken exactly 3 weeks for Noah to admit to himself that he was developing feelings for his straight roommate, and another week to decide that this was a problem he needed to manage carefully. Mark had mentioned his ex-girlfriend during that first conversation, had talked about dating women with the casual ease of someone who had never questioned his sexuality. Noah had been down this road before, had learned the hard way that crushing on straight guys was a recipe for heartbreak and awkwardness. So he had been careful. He had kept their interactions friendly, but not too intimate, had dated other people to prove to himself that he wasn't fixated on Mark, had thrown himself into work projects that kept him busy and distracted. It had been working, mostly until the night everything changed. Mark had come home that evening looking frustrated and defeated, dropping his keys on the kitchen counter with more force than necessary and running his hands through his hair in the way he did when he was stressed. Quote, Noah had asked from his spot at the kitchen table where he had been working on his laptop. Quote, Mark had replied, pulling a beer from the refrigerator and leaning against the counter. Quote, Noah had closed his laptop and given Mark his full attention. In the months they had been living together, he had learned to read Mark's moods, had discovered that sometimes Mark needed to talk things through and sometimes he needed space to process. Tonight felt like a talking night. Want to tell me about it? Noah had offered. Mark had taken a long pull from his beer before answering. I broke up with Jessica. Noah had felt something twist in his chest at the mention of Mark's girlfriend, a woman he had met exactly twice and who had seemed nice enough but somehow wrong for Mark in ways Noah couldn't articulate without revealing too much about his own feelings. I'm sorry, Noah had said, and meant it. Are you okay? I think so, Mark had replied, but his voice had carried uncertainty. Actually, I think I'm relieved, which probably says something about the relationship. They had talked for hours that night, Mark opening up about his frustrations with dating, about feeling like he was going through the motions without ever finding real connection. Noah had listened and offered what support he could, all while trying to ignore the selfish part of him that was relieved Jessica was out of the picture. I don't know what I'm looking for, Mark had said eventually, staring into his empty beer bottle. Everyone keeps telling me I'll know when I find the right person, but I'm starting to think maybe I'm broken or something. You're not broken, Noah had said firmly. Maybe you just haven't found your person yet. Maybe, Mark had agreed, but he had sounded doubtful. That conversation had marked a shift in their dynamic. Mark had seemed more open after that, more willing to share his thoughts and feelings, more inclined to seek out Noah's company. Their casual movie nights had become more frequent. Their morning coffee conversations had grown longer, and Noah had found himself walking an increasingly fine line between being a supportive friend and revealing feelings that could ruin everything. The real trouble had started 2 weeks later when Mark had begun asking questions that felt loaded with subtext Noah wasn't sure how to interpret. Have you ever been in love? Mark had asked one evening as they sat on the couch, ostensibly watching television but mostly just talking. Yes, Noah had answered honestly, a few times. What did it feel like? Noah had considered his answer carefully, like everything else became background noise, like the world made more sense when they were around. Mark had been quiet for a long moment. I don't think I've ever felt that. You will, Noah had said, trying to keep his voice steady. How do you know? Because you're a good person who deserves to be loved completely. Mark had looked at him then with an expression Noah couldn't quite read, something soft and searching that had made Noah's heart race. You make it sound simple, Mark had said. It is simple, Noah had replied. Finding it is the hard part. These conversations had become more frequent, Mark asking questions about love and relationships in connection with an intensity that suggested he was working through something important. Noah had tried to be helpful while keeping his own feelings carefully hidden, but it had become increasingly difficult to maintain that balance. The night that changed everything had started like any other. Mark had suggested they watch something together, and they had settled on the couch with takeout containers in a movie neither of them had seen before. But from the moment Mark had sat down, Noah had sensed something different about his energy, something restless and uncertain. Halfway through the movie, Mark had shifted closer under the pretense of reaching for his drink, and then somehow had never moved back. Their shoulders had been touching, then their thighs, and Noah had found himself hyper-aware of every point of contact while trying to act like nothing had changed. Noah, Mark had said during a quiet moment into the film, his voice soft enough that Noah had to turn to hear him properly. Yeah? Can I ask you something? Of course. Mark had hesitated, seeming to struggle with his words. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to kiss someone you weren't supposed to? The question had hit Noah like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs and making his heart stutter in his chest. He had stared at Mark, trying to read his expression in the flickering light from the television screen. What do you mean? Noah had managed to ask. I mean someone who's your friend, someone who's... Mark had trailed off, shaking his head. Never mind, forget I asked. But Noah couldn't forget, couldn't pretend he hadn't heard the question or seen the way Mark's gaze had dropped to his lips for just a moment before flicking away. Mark, Noah had said carefully, are you asking me hypothetically, or are you asking me about someone specific? Mark had been quiet for so long that Noah had started to think he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice had been barely above a whisper. The confession had hung between them in the quiet apartment, heavy with possibility and terror in equal measure. Noah had felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he searched Mark's face, looking for any sign that this was some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. Noah, Mark had said, his voice rough with emotion, please say something. I don't know what to say, Noah had admitted. I've been hoping you'd figure this out for months, but I never actually believed it would happen. You've been hoping? I've been in love with you since about 2 weeks after I moved in, Noah had said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. I've been trying so hard to be a good friend and not make things weird, but Mark, you have no idea how much I've wanted this. Mark's eyes had gone wide. Altahanda quodan, Noah had said simply. Quotamatoi, quotamano. Mark had reached for him then, his hand cupping Noah's face with a gentleness that had made Noah's chest ache with longing. Quotamam. Mark had asked, his thumb brushing across Noah's cheekbone. Please, Noah had whispered. The first touch of Mark's lips against his had been soft and uncertain, a question more than a statement. But when Noah had responded, when he had kissed back with months of pent-up feeling behind it, Mark had made a soft sound of surprise and need that had gone straight through Noah like electricity. The kiss had deepened, becoming more urgent and desperate as they poured months of unspoken longing into the connection between them. Mark had tasted like beer and possibility, like everything Noah had been afraid to want. And when they had finally broken apart, both breathing hard, Noah had felt like his entire world had shifted into focus. Cautando. Mark had breathed, resting his forehead against Noah's. Yeah, Noah had agreed, unable to form more coherent words. That felt... Mark had trailed off, seeming to search for the right description. Right, Noah had suggested. So right, Mark had confirmed. So right, it's scary. They had stayed like that for a long moment, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, both seeming afraid to move and break the spell that had settled over them. What happens now? Mark had asked eventually. I don't know, Noah had said honestly. What do you want to happen? I want to figure this out with you, Mark had said. I want to see where this goes. I'm terrified and confused and I have no idea what I'm doing. But I know I don't want to pretend this didn't happen. I don't want to pretend either, Noah had said. But Mark, you need to be sure. I can't be your experiment or your quarter-life crisis. If we do this, if we try this, I need to know you're serious about figuring it out. I'm serious, Mark had said immediately. Noah, I've never been more serious about anything in my life. I don't understand what's happening to me, but I know that being with you feels more real than anything I've ever experienced. Noah had searched Mark's face and found nothing but sincerity and determination. Quote Waharam, Noah had said. Quote Sandwam. Mark had smiled then, the kind of smile that had made Noah fall for him in the first place. Bright and genuine and full of possibility. Quote 78. Mark had agreed and kissed him again. That night had been the beginning of everything. They had stayed up until dawn talking, exploring this new dynamic between them, sharing stories and fears and hopes for what might come next. Mark had been honest about his confusion and his fear, but also about the relief he felt at finally understanding why none of his previous relationships had ever felt complete. Quote 79. Mark had confessed as they lay together on the couch, Noah's head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Every girlfriend I had was great on paper, but I always felt like I was playing a role, like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. And now, Noah had asked, now I feel like myself for the first time in years. The next few weeks had been a careful dance of discovery and adjustment. Mark had been eager to explore his feelings, but also overwhelmed by the implications of what it meant for his understanding of himself. Noah had tried to be patient and supportive while also protecting his own heart from the possibility that Mark might decide this was all too complicated and retreat back to the safety of heterosexuality. But Mark had surprised him with his commitment to figuring things out. He had researched sexuality and identity with the same thoroughness he brought to his art projects. He had asked questions that were sometimes awkward, but always genuine. He had been open about his fears while also being brave about pushing through them. I think I might be bisexual, Mark had said one evening about 2 weeks after their first kiss. They had been cooking dinner together, moving around each other in the kitchen with an easy intimacy that still made Noah's heart race. Quote 84. Noah had asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Quote 85. Mark had said immediately. Quote 86. Quote 87. Noah had said softly. Quote Mouse. Quote 89. Mark had said, turning to face him. Quote 90. Quote standing. Quote 90. Mark had said, pulling Noah into his arms. Quote 93. Noah had felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Quote 94. Quote 95. Mark had said and kissed him with a passion that had left no room for doubt. That had been 6 weeks ago, and since then, they had settled into a relationship that felt both brand new and completely natural. Mark had come out to his family and close friends with a confidence that had amazed Noah. He had handled the few negative reactions with grace and the overwhelmingly positive responses with gratitude. He had thrown himself into being Noah's boyfriend with the same intensity he brought to everything else in his life. I've been thinking about something, Mark said, his voice soft in the dim light of their living room. What's that? Noah asked, though he had a feeling he knew where this conversation was heading. They had been together for 6 weeks now, had shared countless kisses and hours of intimate conversation, but they had been taking things slowly in terms of physical intimacy, both wanting to make sure they were building something solid and lasting. About us, Mark said, his hand finding Noah's and intertwining their fingers. Gutter down. Noah's pulse quickened. And what do you want? I want more, Mark said simply. I want everything with you. Noah turned to face him fully, studying Mark's expression in the blue glow from the television. He saw desire there, but also love and certainty that made his chest tight with emotion. But Noah asked, Mark said, bringing their joined hands to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to Noah's knuckles. I've thought about this, Noah. I've thought about it a lot. I want to be with you completely. Mark, Noah breathed, feeling heat pool in his stomach at the intensity in Mark's voice. Quote, Mark continued to quote Cohn. Noah felt his resolve crumbling under the weight of Mark's sincerity and the desire that had been building between them for weeks. I want that too, Noah admitted. I want everything with you. Mark's smile was soft and full of promise. But pardon, he said, standing and offering Noah his hand. Noah took it without hesitation, allowing Mark to pull him to his feet and lead him toward the bedroom they had been sharing for the past month. The room was dimly lit by the streetlights filtering through the curtains, casting everything in a warm, golden glow that made Mark's skin look like it was lit from within. Mark turned to face him once they reached the bed, his hands coming up to frame Noah's face with a tenderness that made Noah's heart ache. I love you, Mark said, the words carrying the weight of everything they had been through together, everything they had discovered about themselves and each other. "I love you too," Noah replied, and then Mark was kissing him with a passion that made his knees weak and his head spin. What followed was tender and passionate, imperfect in ways that Noah had never experienced before. Mark approached their intimacy with the same thoughtfulness and intensity he brought to everything else, learning Noah's body with careful attention and generous affection. There was some awkwardness, some laughter, some moments of uncertainty, but underneath it all was a foundation of love and trust that made everything feel right. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the dim light, Noah's head on Mark's chest, listening to his heartbeat gradually slow back to normal. Quoted 115, Noah asked softly. Quoted 116. Mark replied immediately. Quoted 117. Noah smiled against Mark's skin. Yeah? Yay, Mark said, his fingers threading through Noah's hair. Quote 120. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, both processing what had just happened, both marveling at how natural and right it had felt. Quote 1, Mark said eventually. Quote 20, quote 1. Noah lifted his head and looked at Mark. Quote 1. Mark was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his answer carefully. He said finally. Noah felt his throat tighten with emotion. Noah said softly, "Quote why?" Mark said, pulling him closer. Quote where do you want? Quote what on? Noah asked, his heart skipping a beat. Quote Wasserman, Mark asked, but he was smiling. Quote on? Noah said, leaning up to kiss him. Quote Guardian. 3 months later, Noah woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Mark humming in the kitchen. He smiled before he even opened his eyes, still amazed that this was his life now, that he got to wake up every morning to the knowledge that Mark Price loved him and chose him and wanted to build a life with him. He found Mark at the stove, making pancakes in his pajama pants in one of Noah's t-shirts, his hair sticking up in several directions. The sight made Noah's chest warm with affection. Quote 136. Noah said, wrapping his arms around Mark from behind and pressing a kiss to his neck. Quote 137. Mark replied, leaning back into Noah's embrace. Sleep well? Always do when you're there, Noah said, and felt Mark shiver slightly at the words. Flatterer, Mark accused, but Noah could hear the smile in his voice. They had settled into this routine over the past few months, this easy domestic intimacy that felt both natural and miraculous. Mark had officially moved into Noah's room, though they had kept his room as a studio space for his art. They shared morning coffee and evening conversations, grocery shopping and lazy Sunday mornings, all the small intimacies of a committed relationship. Mark had continued to grow into his identity as a bisexual man with a confidence that amazed Noah. He had joined an LGBTQ art collective and had even done a small show featuring paintings inspired by his journey of self-discovery. His family had been overwhelmingly supportive, and his friends had adjusted to seeing him with Noah with minimal awkwardness. Mark said as they sat down to breakfast. Noah asked. Mark said, his eyes bright with excitement. Noah exclaimed, jumping up to hug him. Mark said, hugging him back tightly. Noah said firmly. Mark said. Noah said, kissing him soundly. As they ate breakfast, Noah marveled at how far they had both come. Mark had blossomed in their relationship, becoming more confident and self-assured as he settled into his identity. He was still the same thoughtful, creative person he had always been. But there was a new lightness to him, a sense of peace that came from finally understanding himself. Noah had changed too. The constant low-level anxiety that had characterized his feelings for Mark during those early months had been replaced by a deep sense of security and contentment. He no longer worried about Mark changing his mind or deciding that being with a man was too complicated. Mark had proven his commitment in countless small ways. From the way he introduced Noah as his boyfriend to friends, to the way he talked about their future together with casual certainty. Mark said as they finished eating, quote 155, quote 157, Noah's heart skipped a beat. What about it? I want to move somewhere bigger, Mark said. Somewhere with more space for my studio, maybe a yard. I want us to get a dog. A dog? Noah laughed. A big, friendly dog that will sleep on our bed and steal food off our plates, Mark said seriously. I want us to have a life together, Noah. A real, committed, this is forever kind of life. Is that a proposal? Noah asked, only half joking. Not yet, Mark said with a grin, but it's a promise that one is coming eventually. Noah felt his chest fill with warmth and love, and the kind of happiness that felt almost too big to contain. I love you, he said, reaching across the table to take Mark's hand. Quote 167, Mark replied, squeezing his fingers. Quote 168, the gallery opening was everything Mark had hoped it would be, and more. The space was filled with people admiring his work, discussing the themes of identity and self-discovery that ran through his paintings, asking thoughtful questions about his artistic process. Noah stood beside him, proud and supportive, watching Mark glow with confidence as he talked about his art with passion and expertise. Quote 169. A woman in an elegant black dress said, gesturing toward one of Mark's larger canvases, the emotion you've captured here is so raw and honest. Thank you, Mark replied, his hand finding Noah's automatically. Quote 152. Noah squeezed Mark's hand, remembering the conversations they had had about that particular painting. It depicted a figure standing at the edge of a cliff, arms outstretched, about to leap into an unknown but brilliantly lit space below. Mark had painted it during the early weeks of their relationship, when he was still processing what it meant to be bisexual and in love with a man. The whole series is about transformation, Mark continued, gesturing toward the other paintings displayed throughout the gallery, about having the courage to let go of who you thought you were supposed to be and become who you actually are. It's beautiful work, the woman said, very moving. As she moved on to examine another piece, Mark turned to Noah with a smile that was equal parts nervous and exhilarated. How am I doing? He asked quietly. You're perfect, Noah said honestly. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done this without you, Mark said. None of this would exist without you. That's not true, Noah protested. This is all you, Mark. Your talent, your courage, your willingness to be vulnerable in your art. My willingness to be vulnerable in my art came from learning to be vulnerable with you, Mark said. You taught me that it was safe to be myself. Before Noah could respond, they were approached by a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit. Mark Price, he asked, extending his hand. I'm David Chen from the Meridian Gallery downtown. I'd like to talk to you about the possibility of a solo show. Noah watched as Mark's eyes went wide with surprise and excitement. A solo show at the Meridian Gallery was a huge opportunity, the kind of break that could launch a serious career. Mark managed to say, shaking the man's hand. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and conversations, potential buyers and fellow artists, champagne toasts, and business cards exchanged. By the time they made it home, both of them were exhausted but exhilarated. I can't believe that actually happened, Mark said as they collapsed onto their couch, the same couch where they had shared their first kiss all those months ago. Believe it, Noah said, pulling Mark against his side. You did that. Your talent, your hard work, your willingness to be vulnerable and honest in your art. David Chen wants to give me a solo show, Mark said, still sounding amazed. A real solo show at a real gallery. You deserve it, Noah said firmly. Your work is incredible, Mark. Tonight proved that. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream, Mark said, turning in Noah's arms to face him. Noah assured him, pressing a soft kiss to Mark's forehead. This is real. We're real. I love you, Mark said, the words carrying all the weight of everything they had been through together, everything they had built. I love you too, Noah replied. So much. They sat together in the quiet of their apartment, processing the events of the evening, both amazed at how much their lives had changed since that night when Mark had first confessed his feelings. Noah, Mark said softly. Yeah? I want to ask you something, but I'm nervous. Noah's heart began to race. Wito. Mark pulled back to look at him directly, his expression serious but warm. 207, Mark began. Noah agreed, his pulse quickening. Mark continued. Noah said, hardly daring to breathe. Mark said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. Quote, Noah's breath caught in his throat as Mark slid off the couch and onto one knee, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring that caught the light from their living room lamp. No award, Mark said, his voice steady despite the emotion Noah could see in his eyes. You saved my life in ways you don't even know. You helped me understand who I was meant to be. You loved me through my confusion and fear, and you've made every day since we've been together better than the last. Noah felt tears streaming down his face, his heart so full of love and joy that he could barely contain it. I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, supporting your dreams, building a home with you, and showing you every day how grateful I am that you waited for me to figure out what you already knew. Mark continued, Will you marry me? Yes, Noah said immediately, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, of course, yes. Mark's face broke into the brightest smile Noah had ever seen as he slipped the ring onto Noah's finger and stood to kiss him with a passion that conveyed everything words couldn't express. Quote 200 in Noah said later as they lay in bed, Noah's hand resting on Mark's chest so he could admire the way his engagement ring caught the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window. Quote 20, Mark said, pressing a kiss to the top of Noah's head. That couch is where everything started for us. When did you know? Noah asked. When did you know you wanted to marry me? Mark was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns on Noah's bare shoulder. He said finally, Noah said, Mark said, quote 229, quote Tridoman, Noah said firmly, quote Tree, quote, Mark repeated softly, quote Tretter, quote Tartan, Noah said, tilting his head up to kiss Mark's jaw. Though I have to admit, I'm a little nervous about planning a wedding. Why nervous? Because I want it to be perfect, Noah said. I want it to be a celebration of everything we've been through together, everything we've overcome to get here. It will be perfect, Mark said confidently, because it's ours. The next morning, they woke up to Noah's phone buzzing with notifications. Mark's sister had apparently posted photos from the gallery opening on social media, including several of Noah and Mark together, and word about their engagement had somehow gotten out. Look at this, Noah said, scrolling through the congratulatory messages, flooding his social media accounts. People are happy for us, Mark observed, reading over Noah's shoulder. Quote, chapter 43. Noah agreed, feeling overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support from friends, family, and even strangers who had been following Mark's artistic journey. I want to post something, Mark said, something official. Mark reached for his own phone and pulled up a photo from the previous night. It was a candid shot someone had taken of them at the gallery, Noah looking up at Mark with obvious adoration while Mark gestured toward one of his paintings. They looked happy and natural and completely in love. This one, Mark said, showing Noah the image, with a caption about how art imitates life and how sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that catch you completely off guard. That's perfect, Noah said, watching as Mark typed out the post and added hashtags about love and authenticity and finding your person. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Comments poured in from friends and family, from fellow artists and gallery patrons who had met them the night before, from strangers who were moved by their story. We're helping people, Noah realized. Just by being ourselves, by being open about our journey, we're helping other people find the courage to be authentic. That's incredible, Mark said, his voice full of wonder. That's love, Noah replied. Real love, honest love. It radiates outward. It makes the world a little bit brighter for everyone. 6 months later, Noah stood in front of a full-length mirror in a small room at the back of the botanical garden where they had chosen to hold their wedding. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his tie for the third time, nervous energy coursing through him despite the fact that he had never been more certain of anything in his life. You look perfect, said Ralph Parker, his best man and longtime friend, who was watching Noah's pre-wedding jitters with amused affection. Quote, Noah admitted. Quote, Ralph assured him. Quote, Tiffany. A soft knock on the door interrupted their conversation, and Noah's sister Jessica Baker peeked her head in. It's time, she said with a warm smile. Everyone's seated, the officiant is ready, and your groom is waiting for you at the altar, looking like he might vibrate out of his skin with excitement. Noah felt his heart rate spike even higher, but underneath the nerves was a deep well of joy and anticipation. "Ready?" Ralph asked, offering Noah his arm. "Ready," Noah said and meant it. The ceremony was being held in a beautiful garden pavilion surrounded by flowering trees. As Noah walked down the aisle with Ralph beside him, he was dimly aware of the faces turning to smile at him, of the soft music playing, of the perfect spring weather. But all of that faded into background noise the moment he saw Mark waiting for him at the altar. Mark looked absolutely stunning in his charcoal gray suit with a white rose boutonniere. His hair was perfectly styled, his face was glowing with happiness, and his eyes were locked on Noah with an intensity that made Noah's knees weak. As their gazes met across the garden, Noah saw Mark's nervous expression melt into one of pure joy and love, and Noah felt his own anxiety disappear completely. When Noah reached the altar, Mark stepped forward to meet him, taking his hands with fingers that trembled slightly. "Hi," Mark whispered, just loud enough for Noah to hear. "Hi," Noah whispered back, unable to stop smiling. The officiant, a friend of theirs who had gotten ordained specifically to perform their ceremony, cleared her throat gently to get their attention. "We are gathered here today," she began, "to witness and celebrate the union of Noah Ward and Mark Price, two people who have found in each other not just love, but partnership, friendship, and the courage to be their most authentic selves." Noah listened to the opening words of the ceremony, but his focus remained primarily on Mark, on the way the afternoon sunlight caught in his hair, on the tears of happiness he was clearly trying not to shed. "Noah and Mark have chosen to write their own vows," the officiant continued. "Noah, would you like to go first?" Noah nodded, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket with shaking hands. "Mark," he began, his voice stronger than he had expected, "when I first met you, I thought I was just looking for a roommate. I had no idea I was actually looking for my soulmate, my best friend, and the love of my life, all rolled into one incredibly talented, incredibly brave, incredibly beautiful man." Mark's eyes filled with tears, and Noah had to pause for a moment to collect himself. Quoted 271, Noah continued. Quote 270, quote to Sarnan, quoted for Noah said, looking directly into Mark's eyes, "I promise to never stop falling in love with you, because every day I discover something new to admire, something new to cherish, something new to be grateful for. Mark Price, you are my heart, my home, my everything. I can't wait to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me." By the time Noah finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden, including his own. Mark was crying openly now, not bothering to wipe away the tears streaming down his face. The officiant said gently. Mark pulled his own piece of paper from his pocket, his hands shaking so much that Noah reached out to steady him. Quote 279. Mark began, his voice thick with emotion. Quote Duad Potty. Quote Dudanon. Quote 243. Mark said, quote, by the time Mark finished his vows, Noah was sobbing openly, overwhelmed by the love and gratitude and pure joy coursing through him. Quote 286, the officiant prompted gently. Ralph stepped forward with Noah's ring, while Mark's sister Samantha Hughes presented Mark's ring. The rings were simple gold bands that they had chosen together, elegant and timeless symbols of their commitment. "Noah," the officiant said, "as you place this ring on Mark's finger, please repeat after me. With this ring I thee wed." "With this ring I thee wed," Noah repeated, sliding the band onto Mark's finger with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Quote 29. Quote 291. Mark said, his voice clear and strong as he placed Noah's ring next to his engagement ring. "By the power vested in me," the officiant said with a radiant smile, "and by the love that clearly exists between you, I now pronounce you married. You may kiss your husband." Mark didn't wait for the words to be finished before he was pulling Noah into his arms and kissing him with a passion that conveyed everything words couldn't express. The garden erupted in cheers and applause, but Noah was only dimly aware of the celebration around them. All that existed in that moment was Mark's lips against his, the taste of tears and joy and promises kept, the feeling of finally, officially, completely belonging to each other. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mark rested his forehead against Noah's and smiled. "Hello, husband," he said softly. "Hello, husband," Noah replied, the word feeling perfect on his tongue. The reception was held in the garden's event hall, A beautiful space with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the same flowering trees where they had just exchanged vows. The room was decorated with white roses and soft candlelight, creating an atmosphere that was both elegant and intimate. The dinner was delicious, featuring all of their favorite foods and a cake that was almost too beautiful to cut. But the highlight of the evening was the speeches. Ralph spoke first, telling embarrassing stories about Noah from their college days and talking about how much happier and more confident Noah had become since meeting Mark. Quote 296. Ralph said, raising his glass. Quote 297. Samantha Hughes spoke next, sharing stories about Mark's journey of self-discovery and how much his art had evolved since he had started dating Noah. Mark has always been talented, she said, but it wasn't until he met Noah that his art became truly transcendent. Love has made him a better artist and a better man. Noah, thank you for helping my brother find himself. But the most moving speech came from Mark himself, who stood up unexpectedly during dessert and asked for everyone's attention. Quote, Thran, he began. Quote, 301. The room fell silent as Mark turned to face Noah, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Quote to 302, Mark said. Quote to 3, quote 30, quote 305. Mark turned back to Noah, reaching for his hands. Quote through 6, quote 37. Mark said, raising his glass. Quote 3, he said, looking directly at Noah. Quote 39. The room erupted in applause and tears, and Noah stood to kiss his husband again, overwhelmed by love and gratitude. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dancing and laughter and celebration. Noah and Mark had their first dance to a song they had chosen together, swaying slowly in the center of the dance floor while their family and friends watched with obvious joy. Mark asked as they moved together to the music. Quote 311. Noah replied without hesitation. Quote 3, quote Mark said, spinning Noah gently before pulling him back into his arms. Quote Briton, quote. Noah replied and kissed him again as their guests cheered around them. Later, as the evening wound down, Noah and Mark stood together in the garden where they had been married, looking up at the stars. Quote 3, Mark said softly, his arm around Noah's waist. We did, Noah agreed. We're married. How does it feel different, Mark asked. Being married instead of just engaged. Noah considered the question. It feels more solid somehow, more permanent, like we've made a public declaration that this is forever, and now the whole world knows it. Forever, Mark repeated as if testing the word. I like the sound of that. Me too, Noah said, leaning into Mark's embrace. As they stood together under the stars, surrounded by the lingering scent of the flowers that had witnessed their vows, Noah felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. This was his life now. This beautiful, talented, brave man was his husband, his partner, his forever person. He said suddenly, quote, 326. Mark asked the question that had become something of a running joke between them. Quote 327, Noah said. Quote 328 and quote 329, Mark replied. Quote 330. Quote 331, Noah said. Quote 332, quote 333, Noah said. The word that had become their promise to each other. Mark agreed and kissed him under the stars as their wedding day became their wedding night, as their engagement became their marriage, as their love story continued into whatever beautiful chapters awaited them. 1 year later, Noah sat in the living room of their new house, a charming 2-story home with the big front yard Mark had dreamed of, watching his husband put the finishing touches on a painting that would be featured in his upcoming solo exhibition. The past year had been a whirlwind of changes and growth, new adventures and deepening love. Quote 335, Mark asked, stepping back from the canvas to give Noah a better view. The painting was stunning, a large-scale work that depicted 2 figures standing at the edge of a cliff, hands intertwined, about to leap together into a brilliant, unknown sky. It was clearly inspired by Mark's earlier work about transformation and courage. But this piece had an added element of partnership, of shared bravery that spoke to everything they had built together. It's incredible, Noah said honestly. It's us, isn't it? It's us, Mark confirmed, setting down his brush and coming to sit beside Noah. It's about taking leaps of faith together, about how love makes you brave enough to face the unknown. I love it, Noah said, leaning into Mark's side. Quote 341. Quote from Noah said suddenly, remembering the phone call he had received that afternoon. Quote affected Mark asked, echoing their old routine. Quote Noah said, unable to suppress his excitement. Quote Buster, Mark's face lit up with joy and pride. Noah, that's incredible. Creative director? Creative director, Noah confirmed. Starting next month. Mark pulled him into a fierce hug, spinning him around their living room as they both laughed with delight. It means more money, Noah said. More creative control. And it means I can finally quit taking on freelance projects in the evenings. Which means more time for us, Mark said, his eyes sparkling with possibility. More time for us, Noah agreed. More time for you to paint. More time for us to travel. More time for... He paused, suddenly nervous about bringing up the conversation they had been having more frequently lately. More time for what? Mark prompted gently. More time to think about expanding our family, Noah said, the words coming out in a rush. Mark's expression grew serious, but not in a bad way. They had been talking about children for months now, both agreeing that they wanted to be fathers someday, but uncertain about timing and logistics. Quote 356, Mark asked. Quote 357, Noah said. Quote 358, quote 359, Mark said with Erin. Quote 360. Noah laughed, remembering their long-standing plan to adopt a big, friendly dog. Quote 361, he said. Quote 362, quote 373. Mark agreed and kissed him with a passion that suggested he was very much on board with their expanding family plans. The next day they drove to the animal rescue with a car full of dog supplies, both nervous and excited about meeting Duke, a golden retriever mix they had seen online. Duke was everything his photo had promised and more. He was gentle and friendly, immediately warming up to both Noah and Mark, seeming to sense that they were potential family rather than just visitors. Quote 364, the volunteer said with a smile. Quote 365, Mark said, scratching behind Duke's ears. Within 2 hours, they were driving home with Duke settled comfortably in the back seat, already seeming to understand that this car ride was different from all the others. Welcome home, Duke, Noah said as they pulled into their driveway. Duke seemed to approve of his new home immediately, exploring the yard with enthusiasm before settling on his new dog bed in the living room as if he had always lived there. He's perfect, Mark said that evening as they watched Duke sleep peacefully by the fireplace. I can't believe we waited this long to do this. Everything in its time, Noah said, curling up beside Mark on the couch. We needed to be ready, and now we are. Ready for a dog, ready for kids, ready for whatever comes next, Mark said, pulling Noah closer. Ready for whatever comes next, Noah agreed. 6 months later, Noah woke up on a Saturday morning to the sound of Mark's laughter coming from the kitchen, followed by Duke's excited barking. He smiled before he even opened his eyes, amazed as always by the life they had built together, by how natural and right everything felt. He found Mark and Duke in the kitchen, Mark cooking breakfast while Duke sat at attention nearby, clearly hoping for dropped food. The sight made Noah's heart swell with love and contentment. Quote 373. Mark said, turning to kiss Noah good morning. Quote 374. Quote 375. Noah said, scratching Duke behind the ears and earning an enthusiastic tail wag. As they ate breakfast together, Duke begging shamelessly for scraps, Noah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 2 years ago, he had been a lonely man, convinced that his feelings for his roommate were hopeless. Now he was married to that same man, living in a beautiful home, planning a future that included children and continued adventures, and a love that grew stronger every day. Code 376. Mark asked, noticing Noah's contemplative expression. Just how grateful I am, Noah said, for all of this, for you, for us, for the life we've built. Even for Duke? Mark asked with a grin, as their dog chose that moment to steal a piece of bacon from Mark's plate. Especially for Duke, Noah said, laughing. He completes our little family. Speaking of family, Mark said, his expression growing more serious, I've been thinking about what you said about kids. Yeah, Noah asked, his heart rate picking up slightly. I think I'm ready, Mark said. I think we're ready. I want to start the process, whatever that looks like for us. Noah felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. They had been talking about children for months, but this felt like the moment when it became real. Really? He asked. Really, Mark confirmed. I want us to be dads, Noah. I want to raise children with you, to give them the kind of love and acceptance we've found with each other. I want that too, Noah said, his voice thick with emotion. More than anything. They spent the rest of the morning researching adoption agencies, making lists of questions and requirements, beginning the process that would hopefully lead to them becoming fathers. It felt overwhelming and exciting, and absolutely right. Whatever happens, Marcus said as they sat together on their couch later that day, Duke sprawled across both their laps. I know we'll figure it out together. Together, Noah agreed, the word that had become their promise, their foundation, their everything. As the afternoon sun streamed through their windows, illuminating the art that covered their walls and the life they had built together, Noah felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. He thought about that night 2 years ago when Mark had asked to watch something together, when they had sat on the same couch and everything had changed. He thought about how scared they had both been, how uncertain about what their feelings meant and where they might lead. He thought about the courage it had taken for Mark to question everything he thought he knew about himself, the patience it had taken for Noah to wait for Mark to find his way. Most of all, he thought about love. Real love, honest love, the kind of love that transforms you and challenges you and makes you brave enough to become who you were always meant to be. Thank you, he said suddenly, the words coming from the deepest part of his heart. For what this time? Mark asked, the familiar question accompanied by a smile full of love and understanding. For staying, Noah said simply, for staying long after the movie ended that night, for being brave enough to explore what you were feeling, for choosing love over fear. Thank you for waiting for me, Mark replied, for loving me enough to let me figure it out, for showing me what it means to be truly, completely myself. Thank you for proving that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that catch you completely off guard, Noah said. Thank you for showing me that home isn't a place, Mark said. It's a person. It's you. As they sat together in the golden afternoon light, their dog sleeping peacefully across their laps, their future stretching out before them full of possibility and promise, Noah understood that this was what happiness looked like. Not a destination you reached, but a journey you took with the right person, a choice you made every day to love and be loved, to grow and change and become better together than you ever could apart. Their love story had begun with a simple request to watch something together, but it had become so much more than either of them could have imagined. It had become a testament to the power of authenticity, the courage required for true intimacy, and the transformative magic that happens when two people are brave enough to love each other completely. And as Mark leaned over to kiss him one more time, as Duke stirred in their laps and the sun continued to shine through their windows onto the life they had built together, Noah knew that their story was far from over. This was just the beginning of whatever beautiful chapters awaited them, whatever adventures and challenges and joys lay ahead. They would face it all together, just as they had promised. Always together, always choosing love, always grateful for the unexpected gift of finding their person in the most ordinary of moments, when all it took was the courage to stay a little longer than expected and see what might unfold.